So God is giving me a message today called Sometimes It Takes a Foreigner. And it's a message I'm very excited about because I think it provides a good reminder from Scripture that you would not predict it's from. It's from Matthew chapter 2, the birth of Jesus Christ. And it's a story that pretty much everyone has heard, but typically only in preparation for Christmas, because there seems to be only one story, only one meaning. But God has helped me dig out a second meaning. Sometimes it takes a foreigner, with the idea that sometimes it takes a foreigner to observe something in your heart that you didn't already notice, either for good or for bad. So we read Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of King Herod, wise men from the east arrived unexpectedly in Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." I think the first thing to note is that oftentimes foreigners will come into your life unexpectedly. It happened in verse 1. The wise men showed up to Jerusalem and they did not expect their arrival. In the same way that when a foreigner interacts with you, you can't predict it and you can't prepare for the interaction. But the truth is, you will meet new people in your life. That is a guarantee, unless you're a hermit and you're living in the woods, which I don't think, if you're watching this, that's you, but I can't assume. So yeah, oftentimes foreigners show up unexpectedly, but sometimes, and we're going to use the example from this text, the foreigner will observe something in you, and that is why they choose to interact with you. They interact with you in response to something they observe. See, the wise men, they saw a star in the west. They observed the star in the west, and so they followed, even if they couldn't identify it. Eventually, they saw the star was over Jerusalem, and they knew what it meant, that the King of the Jews has been born there. So they were able to identify what they observed, and then they voiced it to King Herod. See, they said, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." They voiced the observation, but then they slid in the goal of them voicing their observation. They wanted information. Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? And oftentimes, or maybe only sometimes, but I believe this to be true, a foreigner will interact with you in response to something they observe. So let's say you're on fire for God, but they can't see that. They just know that there's something different about you. So they come up to you and they ask, "There's something different about you. I don't know what it is. What is it?" They voice the observation, and then they voice the reason for voicing the observation, right? They say, "Why? How? How are you so different?" And then you get to share, "Well, God changed my life." Or maybe for the more negative reason, someone sees pride in you, right? It's just flowing out of your heart. Like you are so prideful and you don't notice it. And someone walks up to you and says, "You are a very prideful person. And if you don't limit that, your pride will limit the provision of God." Well, they're voicing their observation, and the goal behind it is to get you to change the pride that's in your heart. See, oftentimes, when somebody observes something in your heart that you didn't already know, it disturbs you. It violates your expectations. We read in verse 3, "When King Herod heard this, he was deeply disturbed and all Jerusalem with him." And I think for two reasons. Not only because the advertisement that these wise men brought posed a threat to his authority, but also because they advertised news that King Herod didn't know. And this was news he should have known because it was his land, right? So when someone comes up to you and says, "You're on fire for God," as good as that is, it's still kind of disturbing because you feel like you should have known that, considering it is your heart they're observing. Or in the same way, and this is even more disturbing, this is even more apparent, when someone points out a flaw in your heart. You are prideful, man. You are prideful. That disturbs us. Because we say, "How dare can you observe something in me that I don't know? It's my land. I should be able to observe this. How can you?" It's annoying, right? What's really interesting is that the wise men are able to observe something going on in the land that Herod rules, and he doesn't even know it. Even with all of his intelligence, even with all of the chief priests and the scribes, he gets them together in verse 4, and he asks them, "Is this true?" And they find the answer in the Old Testament. They read, "And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the leaders of Judah, because out of you will come a leader who will be the shepherd of my people Israel." So they give him the answer. and it confirms what the foreigner has said. But it also confirms the threat to his comfort, the threat to his security. Just as if someone observes something in your heart that is negative, that poses a threat to the comfort of your life because you have to consider changing some things, and it disturbs you. And so we get desperate, just as King Herod did, because we don't want our comfort to go. So Herod secretly summoned the wise men and asked them the exact time the star appeared. We want as much information as we can get, just as Herod did. So we ask the person who observed something in us, we ask the foreigner information about what they observed. I'm prideful, like, what? Like, what makes you say that? Can you give me a specific example of when you saw pride in me? And then we send them. We send them to go get the answer, to think back on their memories and get the answer for us, right? And then they go back, you know? The foreigner goes just as the wise men did when King Herod told them to go and find out the information about who was Jesus. And so they follow the observation further, right? They follow the observation, and then they get to the answer. The wise men followed the star, the thing they had observed initially, and the thing in the confrontation King Herod allowed them to observe further. They follow the star and find Jesus, the object of their observation. In the same way that a foreigner might look through all their memories of interactions with you until they find what they perceive to be the reason behind your pride, to be the reason behind your lust, to be the reason behind your anger. They find the answer. They find the object of their observation. But what's really interesting, you see, you would expect the foreigner to come back and give you the answer. But what's interesting is that the wise men are warned not to. We know why, obviously, in this story, because King Herod was planning something else. But it makes me think, would God ever tell the foreigner not to tell us the object of their observation? Would God ever warn the foreigner not to tell us the object of their observation in our heart? And I think the answer is yes. Because if there is something in your heart that is not godly, and I believe that is the case with every person, sometimes it takes a foreigner to realize what that flaw is. Sometimes it takes a foreigner to understand where you fall short. But it does not take the foreigner to change you. It does not take the foreigner to save you. So God, being as wise as he is, although he allows the foreigner to observe something in us, he may not allow the foreigner to save us. Wow. In the same way that God did not allow the foreigners, the wise men, to save the comfort of King Herod. In the same way that God did not allow the foreigners, the wise men, to save the security of King Herod. See, guys, sometimes it takes a foreigner. And I pray that after hearing this, receiving this, you might be more open to receiving the criticism of another person. You might be more open to receiving the accountability of another person, with the understanding that sometimes it takes a foreigner to observe something in your heart that you didn't already know. And that is the seed to change. That is the seed to carrying out God's plan. It's all about the observation. It's all about the foreigner sometimes. Thanks.